Okay, cool. Wait, hold on. I'm going to put it. Hi, everybody in Stitcher Hood. I am super excited to introduce you guys to somebody who I just learned about. Her name is Erin Hall. Her business is called Oscilatey, and she lives down in South Carolina, not too far from Myrtle Beach. I hear she's 14 miles from the ocean. I'm going to visit her. We have a similar passion for making really cool upcycle clothing. Erin predominantly uses quilts, if I'm right. We'll learn more about that in just a minute. But Erin, I just want to welcome you to Stitcher Hood, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to sit with me and educate me all about you and your creative process. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, sure, sure. So to start with, can you tell me a little bit about the name of your business? I want to know where you got that name. What is that all about?
So I've actually had the name Oscilatey since I was about 15 years old, and it was my original screen name on AOL AIM.
That's an awesome story.
So I've just kept it because no one else has it as a screen name. It's always just been my name for everything. Um, so I've kept it since then, and I like it.
Yeah, and does it have to do with oscillating?
Yeah. Yeah. So I move from project to project pretty quickly. Like when I change my mind and decide to do something else, like away with the old, in with the new, I can switch on a dime to like doing something new. And I do tend to skip around with different projects or ideas a lot.
That's so cool. And the other thing that I think of when I think of oscillation is the inside of a sewing machine.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the bobbin case and how
Yeah.
the machine actually works. So
Yeah.
another way to makes sense. So tell us a little bit about your business, a little bit about what you make, how you sell it. What give us a little history when you got started.
So the current way my business looks, because it does change, is I currently make clothing and outerwear out of recycled textiles and pre-loved textiles, mainly using quilts, some quilt tops, some bedding like sheets and duvet covers, and they're all pre-owned. So,
Cool.
and I
Cool.
sell on Etsy
Mhm.
exclusively. I don't have a website. But yeah.
So when did you get started with your business?
So I've always kind of done some iteration of making. Originally, maybe over a decade ago, I had a vintage and handmade brick and mortar store called Cersei's down at the beach, and I made a lot of stuff for the store, and I also really love vintage and pre-loved clothing, you know, thrifted items. There was a lot of that in the store. But at that time, I made mainly handmade bathing suits. um,
Wow.
I'm glad I don't. That's a whole different game. But after that, I actually started working for Salvation Army and managed a few of their stores. And I really got into how to move all of this used stuff, right? And after managing a few of those stores, I became a reseller. So basically, I would go in and buy used clothing and then resell it online. But I've always, in that time, I used to have a soap business where I made felted soap and did like vended it. I've made scarves. I've always had something that I made and
Mhm.
sold. Um, so maybe 2 years ago, when the pandemic started, I should say, my reselling business wasn't very exciting to me anymore, and I started doing tie dye for fun. I have one on today, but backyard tie dye using really good dyes. I got really into dyeing, and then I started making stuff out of my tie dyed fabric. So I would buy sheets and tie dye them, and then quilt those and make them into a coat or make it into something else. Um, but really, that's really labor intensive to sell as an item. So I started to really look for textiles that were either discarded or unused or, cheap, cool stuff. I don't like a lot of modern fabric that's out there. I don't also have an apparel fabric store near me. So really I'm kind of a make do kind of person. It's like, okay, so what can I find? And that's when, I started seeing more quilt clothes that were out there and I love them. So I really started integrating that into my process. And it's like I will take anyone's quilt or quilt top or old duvet or old sheets. I'll
That's
take it all.
awesome.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of the whole, like, well, we were talking a little bit before we got started with our recording about the quilt clothes kind of debacle, if you will. And I posted a little just reflection on what I know of it, which is, just a little piece. And it was for me, and I can imagine that it would have been kind of off-putting to someone in your situation where you're making these beautiful clothes out of things that, like, I'm just really glad that there's no like quilt police. That's really what I'm glad about. And I'm really glad that there's no like vintage sweater police, because I'd probably be in jail. But so, and I have a little bit, like, my spin on that whole thing is like, creativity is just like a gift. I almost think of it as like a sacred gift. And if you're able to share your creativity, I don't think there's anybody who can tell you how that you should be creative or you should not be creative. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I mean, I get it, like, historical quilts are beautiful and, like, sure, don't cut them up, but like some people, whatever, like I don't really think that there's a reason why someone should tell someone else how
Well, I also don't think that people realize how much stuff is in the world right now.
yeah.
How much production has happened over, even with handmade items. When I
Yes.
think of just the amount of things that I make, so I normally make between 4 to 8 items a day. I am one person with one
Yes.
sewing machine, well,
Yeah.
multiple sewing machines, but you know,
One
so
at
if
a
you
time.
the life cycle of a lot of these things that are out in the world, there are so much of it.
Yes.
There's so many. I always tell people, the whole thing with quilts, it's like you can get on eBay right now and there are more than 10,000 listings for vintage quilts.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, Erin? Like, I remember people asking me when I, started out my business, like, what are you going to do when you run out of
Not a
sweaters?
thing.
Yeah, people don't understand the enormity of the textile waste crisis that we live with. And
Yeah.
yeah, it would be a beautiful day if we ran out of material. That would
Yeah.
be a beautiful day. We're not going to. So certainly not in my lifetime. And I feel like to just kind of return to the part of the conversation where, like, I love that your background includes the sort of behind the scenes with Salvation Army. Like, that is such a valuable set of knowledge to carry with you, to know, like, I mean, I don't have that. I do have experience with like the wholesale, like garment grader, like bales. When I had my production company, I ran a production company for 22 years, and I bought 1,000-pound bales of, at that time it was mainly wool sweaters.
Yeah.
So
I actually started in the Salvation Army warehouse because it was directly behind the house we had at the time. And I moved up quickly because I am into fashion. I'm into a lot of, I see all the runway shows, not in person, but I watch things. I love to keep up with the fashion trends. But my main thing that moved me up is that as a sorter in the warehouse, I was seeing all of the stuff sent to bale that was sellable goods. And I'm like, how are we sending this to bale when they're not gonna make as much money on it? And the item is probably eventually going to end up in a landfill.
yes.
But when you're in one of those places and you see all the bales of used clothing and textiles that's out there, it's astronomical. It would be, the whole back of the warehouse is just filled,
Yeah.
sometimes 10 bales high in
Yeah.
a row of 40.
Yeah. And that's one Salvation Army warehouse. Yeah.
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 So yeah, it's really, there's like the mindset of abundance is really healthy to carry through life. And I think that when, we think of it as, that's a really good example. It's like there's all of these, I go in there and I'm like, it's like I'm a kid in a candy store. I'm like, where is the cool stuff that I want? Where's, like
Yeah.
what's going to draw my eye? And that's like,
Yeah.
if it's, I feel sometimes like a little bit like a crow, like the brightly colored or like kind of unusual vintage stuff will be like, so it's exciting. I get really
It is.
excited when I find cool material to work with. But the idea of using bedding and like you're using large pieces of fabric, so you're actually able to really create, use your design sense to kind of create the shapes and styles that are, there's more flexibility with that than there would
For
be
sure.
with a more limited or already formed piece of clothing, which is kind
Yeah.
of where I started. So that's such a cool idea. And then so yeah, and then realizing that the labor intensity of, making the quilts yourself, and realizing that that needs to kind of like, oh, so that leads me to a question of like your kind of business background. Do you have a background in like figuring out your whole, the financial aspect of your business? How does that work for you?
So I guess I've worked in a lot of different areas. Um, like where I've been a restaurant manager, I've been a bank teller. But really the business side of it started when I opened my store. And I
Mhm.
did have to, like, I took a score program and wrote a business plan and did all of that. But since I kind of have always had a side hustle selling something, um, as a creative person who now has a creative business, I have to make money. Like, it's just point blank. If I'm going to continue to work from home, in my own little studio, uh, I have to make money.
Yes.
So for me, the bottom line, that means that my work is actually pretty regimented as a creative person. So for me, that means that I cut out every Sunday. It's a set amount of items that are sellable that I know will sell. And those have to get made during the week. So normally I cut out, 30 to 40 items on a Sunday afternoon, and they're all sized out, ready to sew. They're in bags that are lined up, ready to go. And so that means that I need to sew them through the week and get them on the site. I also do I give myself like a fun Friday. Every Friday, I just make whatever I want, which is really helpful for me. And, some days that means like yesterday, I made 4 things yesterday, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make something different. And the rest of the afternoon, I just made whatever I wanted because I'd gotten my work done.
Yep. Yep. That's a really interesting way to do it too, because I think one of the things that happens to people like us is that we kind of get into this, or often people get into this thing where they're like, they have so much freedom that they don't really have um that kind of like
It's hard to
deadline,
rein it
right?
in.
Yeah. Like, and it's the same with me. Like people would ask me when I started, I started my business when I was a college student. So I was like 20, and people would ask me like when I started pulling a paycheck. And I was like, well, the reason I started a business was so that I could make money. Like didn't start a
Yeah.
business so that I could like see if it worked. It was like I
Yeah.
I had to pull a paycheck from the get-go. That's what got me started. So yeah, and I think that it's something that maybe is different for a lot of people who have this like, idea that, oh, they're going to do this and it's going to become successful. I feel like if you have that sort of demand, if you will, that, yeah, I got to make money, and yeah, I got to get this work done this week so that I can continue to have that level of income that you've built into your lifestyle, right? So that's
Yeah.
really cool. I think that's going to be really helpful for people to just think about how they can build that kind of like routine. I love routine.
I
you
do
know
as well. I've found a lot of success. I'm kind of a scattered human. So really making myself, do the work is really important in my day. So I do a lot of batch work. I think batch work is really, really important if you're prone to wandering around your home, or even in your studio and picking at something. So batch work is important to me. Like I'll cut out 20 of the same item in different sizes. Um, but now I know exactly how long it takes to make my different items. Um, I know my average cost of goods that goes into each item. And when you figure those things out, you can really figure out how much money can you make off of what you've made,
Mm-hmm.
how much money you're spending.
Mm-hmm.
And then I pay myself 33% of my sales, basically, right? My income that I bring in. So I pay myself on a weekly basis, and you can kind of watch your business grow when you can really figure out.
I love that. That's a really cool thing. Have you ever heard of a book called Profit First?
Yeah, it's where I got my whole setup from. Yeah. I love it. And for those of you who don't know about Profit First, go buy the book. And even it doesn't really, it's hard to kind of translate some of the things in there to maybe a sole proprietorship or just a, one person LLC, but you really can. And the key takeaway really is that you pay yourself first.
Right.
And when you start doing that, back to that abundance mindset, you really realize like, okay, my work is valuable. You're also giving yourself the instant cash, which is what, besides the freedom of being a creative person, the cash really does come into play at the end of the day.
It sure does.
But that book is really great. I don't utilize a lot of like the having a ton of accounts to spread things out over. I think I only have 3, maybe 4 accounts that mine is spread.
Mhm.
But that book is fantastic.
Totally agree. And I use it as well. And it's the same. I've kind of like morphed it to fit my little business model that of how I run my business today. But I've actually used that model for kind of a bunch of different incarnations of my business. So it's pretty easy to kind of like morph it to fit what you are, what your needs are. That's so cool. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is pricing and the fact that like what your cost of goods are, and what, how much can you spend on a quilt to use? How much can you, those things all play a role. And I've done the same sort of thing with my business over the years. And yeah, it's so good to have that just in your mind. Like how many products can you make out of a queen size quilt? So how much money does that queen size quilt cost you, and how much does that add to the cost of each one of if it's a jacket or a vest or whatever it is that you're creating? Really, really cool to have that like clarity and ability to just like know that what you're doing is profitable. I think a lot of people do struggle with that. So do you have like any formal education and any, like, you just kind of just did it?
Yeah. I'm a college dropout. I went for
Yes, that's awesome. Like, yeah, you knew
uh,
you didn't want that.
yeah, so I went to Hollins University, which is a private girls' school in Roanoke, Virginia, for a year and a half, and then I dropped out. I always said that I spent a lot of time in that year and a half just like sitting in the dormitory hallways making things, because that was like the widest space I could find. So, and even now, and it's funny because I'm married to a college professor. My husband is a costume designer and chair of a theater department.
Oh,
So
how
I'm married to
cool.
a college professor and I don't have a college degree. Um, I couldn't even, people ask all the time, like, have you ever thought of, and I'm like, I have no idea what I would even study.
No,
No idea.
it's very
No.
interesting too, because I think that a lot of people, I mean, I don't know, in my you know I was in college in the 80s, so it was like you go to high school and then you go to college, and it was no like there was not like, maybe you take a gap year if you were like really like unsure, but people would always be like, oh, hope she gets to college at some point. And now I think there's so much more freedom with the the progression of how people kind of unfold and into adulthood. And I have to say, like, I don't think there's a whole lot of correlation between success and education. I feel
No.
like there's a real, if you have a passion and you're able to have the self esteem maybe and confidence to just like follow that passion. And you just knowing the little bit of history, like, oh, you did soap making, and then you had this business with tie-dye, and now you found the spot where it seems like you've created this like beautiful business that is supporting your lifestyle. That's really
Yeah.
that's awesome. I mean,
Thanks.
yeah, really cool.
I
um
enjoy it.
Oh, well, that's the most important part, right? Like we kind
Yeah.
of forget that. Like it's the most important thing you can do is have a good day. And it sounds kind of maybe trite or cliche, but like if you're having a good day, it's a lot easier to be positive and uplifting in the world. And I feel like, human
Yeah.
energy, it's hard to measure that, but I think at some point in the future, people will be able to, and you'll be like, well, when you're in a positive headspace, the world is a better place. Um, so speaking to that, like what's the favorite part of what your life is like right now? What do you love to do the best?
Oh, so my sister always accuses me of being a workaholic. But really what it is that I would always rather be making something. Always. Um I think I realized the other day I took one day off a week ago. So I worked my husband's in the theater, which makes a bit of a difference because he has late nights as well. But I've taken one day off in I think 10 days, but that doesn't mean anything for me because
Who's
that's
not
what
what you do?
I would rather be upstairs working and making something. Um, and so right now, my favorite thing is really that I've created a space for myself and a business for myself that allows me to be doing what I love to be doing, which is making something. And that does come with a little bit, I still put some pressure on myself to, make sure I've made the right amount of things to, explore and make sure I'm not like leaving something out. But there's always that constant feeling of wanting to be making something else. So
Yep.
even when I'm making what I'm making, I always want to be making something new or trying something different.
Yep.
And I just feel really lucky that I've given myself this kind of space to like I have the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
There's no one or limit currently that says no, Erin, you can't make things all day. you know,
Right. Right.
I
Right. And
get to do that.
the other thing I think that's really cool about the process of like upcycling is that you never get sick of it.
No,
Right, there's
you don't.
always something new. There's always like a new fabric or a new texture, or the story that came with whatever you're using is like there's always something to like consider and to like seek out in the future, or to know, well, that was really not something that I want to do again. So there's always like learning and fresh thought and all of this kind of inspiration really that comes from the material, right? Like
Yeah.
I love that about my work, and I see that in your work as well. Um, so how did you get inspired? Is sewing something that you learned growing up? Like how did you, yeah?
Yeah, I used to watch my grandma sew when I was a little girl, and then she got me my first sewing machine, I guess maybe for my 13th birthday. So I started really making friends a lot of things in high school, pillows and pillowcases and different things out of my friend actually still has a pillow I made out of a green suede skirt. And then I stuffed it with the rag bag from the house, like from my house growing up. And so it was like all the things that were probably going to Goodwill or Salvation Army. That's what the stuffing in it was, and she still has it. Um, and prior to that, I think I've always been making something.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah,
That's what,
selling since about 13 on a machine.
yeah. That's cool. I find that that's very often the case where people have it from, family, like grandmother. Sometimes it skips a generation, sometimes it's an
Yeah.
aunt, or but it's very often a skill that's desired at a young age. And then, oh my gosh, all of a sudden, like the world opens up because you can just make
Yeah.
so many different things, right? Um, so do you have a mentor or someone who especially inspires your work right now? Or is there someone who comes to mind when you think about like, who's like somebody that you follow and that you think is just like doing some really cool stuff?
See, I'm always bad at this question. I don't I'm not really inspired by other people's work as much as I really enjoy watching other people work.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I'm kind of like I'm cautious about looking too hard at what other people do that maybe is really similar to my work. Just because like I don't think that's healthy.
Yes,
Um, like
totally
I
agree.
like to kind of just exist in my own world. I'll maybe follow people on Instagram who do kind of the same thing. But for me, it's not like I'm not constantly going back to one person and that I like, totally admire.
Right.
Um,
And you were
for
saying
me,
earlier too that you really like to like watch the runway shows and just like
yeah,
be.
like I love high fashion. And maybe that's really inspiring to me. I love to look at Pinterest and see different textiles and the runway shows that just happened. New York Fashion Week just happened. I love to go through the shows and kind of look at the images of everything. And not necessarily it would even be something that I would make, but
Yeah.
I just find that really enjoyable. Um, I'm also like my husband is really into men's fashion, and he's a costume designer. So he and I really play off each other a lot when it comes to ideas that one of us has. He helps me when I have questions. He can make a pattern. He can do all the things that a costume designer can do. So whenever I'm struggling with something, he's always my first go-to person to
Yep.
throw feedback, to throw it back and forth with. And that's great
That's
to
pretty
have.
cool. It's pretty cool to have that. And that I think for me it's the same. Like I don't really follow a lot of people who make work that is like my work, but I am really I mean, there's painters that really inspire me, and there's fashion designers that are doing, I mean, stuff that is just like off the mark, like I,
Yeah.
you know, things that you just are so unexpected and like really pushing material to an extreme level, or like the shapes of things, or the ways
Yeah.
things fall, or yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of inspiration for me. And I'm also really inspired by kind of like outsider art people who are just doing things that are like super primitive but then have this like finesse of finish. I really like that kind of juxtaposition of like hand work and then like
Oh, yeah.
fine, like. So, and then you were working with all these quilts, so like all of those people that worked on all of that stuff are probably like feeding you little like nuggets as you work, and it's just like osmosis, right? Like coming in
Yeah.
your
You
process.
always discover something new in a quilt, which is fun.
Yeah.
It's an interesting textile, especially when the other day I was cutting a quilt from my scrap pile and I realized that there was another quilt top underneath. There was a second quilt, essentially. And I was like, let me peel this back and see what's back here. And I do work with a ton. I prefer a dirty textile. Maybe not necessarily dirty, but I like something to be stained. I like it to have holes in it. I want it to have wear. Um, I don't love the idea of art being precious. I want something that you can use. Like I just finished up a dress this morning and the quilt it's made out of, it is kind of stained up. But there's also something really nice about putting on a dress and going out into the world with your children or with, your dogs and not worrying about, oh, I'm going to get something on this.
Right.
Like, I want my clothes to be out there living life. I don't want them to be the thing that you don't wear because you're scared that you're going to mess it up.
Yes,
Like
totally
I
agree.
I need I need it to be out there. I want it
Yeah.
on your body. I want it in the dirt. I want it drinking wine on the beach.
Yep.
Like I want all the things for the clothes.
Yeah. That's
Um,
so cool. And I feel like that is such a I have a girlfriend out in Boulder and she makes really beautiful table linens and she's the same way. She's like, do not let this be precious. Use it. Use it. Like this was made not to like sit in your drawer so you can give it to your grandkids. It's made for
yeah.
you to like, and I just remember that like hearing her say that and feeling like so that resonated so nicely with me because I feel the same way, like especially like handmade things that they're expensive. So if you're gonna buy
Yeah.
this expensive, beautiful thing, use it, wear
Yeah.
it. Don't let
Yeah.
it be that sort of like, yes, the taking the precious part out, I think is I totally agree with you on that. I think that's such a and it allows people to appreciate art on their bodies, right? Like I think
Yeah.
that and it allows people to present like individually and express their individuality by how they present themselves in the world. I think that's it's really empowering for a lot of
Yeah.
people. Um so I think I would love to just share with Stitcherhood a little bit about where people can find you. You said you had an Etsy shop. If you can and we'll put this all like in the comments and stuff too, but I guess before we wind things down, Etsy is like your platform. You can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how that works for you? How do you promote your Etsy shop? How do you get people to find you there?
So I'm a little bit lucky in the fact that I have a pretty large social media following. And that's kind of rolled over from my days as a reseller of clothing. So I do have, I guess, like 39,000 followers on Instagram currently. Um, Outside of just sharing my stuff. So I did create I wanted an Instagram account that I could just put up every single make that I made. So I now have like Shop Oscilatey as well. And there's just a link to my Etsy on there. But really I started that just for me because items you make something and then sometimes 2 days later it's out the door and you're like, God, I didn't get the love on that enough, you know? Like,
Totally. Yep.
and I'm not one, so this is weird about me. I don't wear a lot of the things that I make. Um, I have, I'll make myself something really special sometimes. Like we went to a gala 2 weeks ago and I made myself a beautiful dress out of 2 silk quilts. But every day, like day to day, I don't wear a lot of my own makes. Um, Mainly because I don't make stuff for me very often. I make stuff for other people. So I started that Instagram mainly to keep a photo of everything that I had made.
Yep.
But I do link that to my Etsy shop. Etsy to me is just really easy. Um, as far as platform goes, I really like, and this is like a back to our financial talk, having a website that will collect tax for you in the modern world of tax codes is huge.
Yes.
And yes, you can build that into a Shopify, you can do all of those things, but having a sales tax collected for you is really primo to simplifying your life as an entrepreneur.
That is
Um,
so true. That is really, and then, so do you use a bookkeeper or do you do all your own books yourself?
I think this year is the first year that my husband is going to force me into getting an accountant. Um, I out earned him last year for the first year in our marriage. So I think this year is
Awesome.
the year he's going to be like, you've got to stop doing this because he's done it for me. I do use QuickBooks Self-Employed on a day-to-day basis. It's an app. It's fantastic. That makes it really helpful. You keep a separate business account.
Totally.
You
Yep.
can simplify, but Etsy really does help me maintain my business a little bit better. And really for, search engine optimization, you can't beat having someone else do that for you when you're not ready to do it all yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it really makes my business accessible to more people, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do still having, almost 40,000 Instagram followers. Etsy still brings me in more business than I do for my business,
Wow, that's
which is
pretty
saying a
cool.
lot.
Yeah.
Um, and I bring myself in a pretty fair amount, but I think it's still under 20% of my sales. And Etsy could be lying to me. Um, they
Probably
they
not.
might like my ad revenue. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just easy.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think that's a great way for people, to get started if it's not something that, is a long-term thing. Like for you, it seems to be like that's just it works. Why, if it's not
Yeah.
broke, don't fix it. I think that's a really cool thing. And
And
it
you
is
really have to
easy.
think about like how would someone find me?
Yep. Yep.
How would they find you?
Yep.
And for me, I spent a lot of years doing local, pop-up markets and the farmers market and the makers markets, and that gets exhausting.
Sure does.
And you
Schlepping and
you
yeah.
schlep all your stuff there, you set it all up, you have to have all this cash, you have to sit there all day, you have to watch people's faces react to your work in real time. In real time, somebody looks at your work and decides if they like it or not. Um, so yeah, just take it to the internet. Let the internet decide.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think that, my business model when I started was like, I wholesaled. I sold to stores and I'd sell something for $100, the store would sell it for $200. That's just how it
Yeah,
was. And so when Etsy came on the scene and it was like 3.5%, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like I could sell, instead of
yeah,
me making $100, I could sell it for 150. It'd still be cheap to my end user,
yeah,
but I'm making so much more money off it. So it was I think it really changed the playing field for makers in the world when it
yeah,
was just, wow, this accessible, pretty user friendly, pretty like, straight. And yeah, the tax thing is like super easy. They do it all for you. And yeah, so I totally, I think that's awesome. It's funny. I kind of morphed my shop. I have an Etsy shop, but most of my business I funnel through my website,
mhm,
and I have a bookkeeper, and I don't know what I would do without her because I don't, taxes are, it's every time you sell in a different state, it's like you got to know what you're up to. So
yeah,
this has been so super helpful, Erin. I really love your perspective, your focus on the business aspect of what you do. I think is super valuable for a lot of people. Um, and I just wanted to like thank you and hope that you have a chance to check Stitcher Hut out. We would love to
yeah,
show you around over there a little bit.
yeah.
And I'm just gonna say thank you one more time, and then I'm gonna hit the actually I probably won't say it another time. I'm just gonna unrecord for one moment. We're gonna be done with the recording.